Thank you so much for joining. And maybe could you start a little bit about telling us about yourself, introducing yourself, what is your background, just so the viewers can, have some context about what it is that you specialize in.
Yeah, great. I'd love to introduce myself. I always find it quite hard because I do quite a lot of different things. But on paper, I'm a consultant and a creative strategist. I'm a producer, and I focus on fashion and sustainability. I have a background in art history. That's what I studied in the UK at a BA level about 7 or 8 years ago. And from then, I've been heavily involved in innovation in the fashion industry, from fashion tech, wearable stuff, 3D printing and retail. And that interest in fashion innovation led me naturally to the sustainability space, which I've now been working in for the last 3 years as the program manager for Copenhagen Fashion Summit, which is the world's leading B2B fashion event on fashion and sustainability.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I think it's really, really great how you can be involved in that really important conversation that a lot of brands and a lot of people should be having about sustainability, and especially in the context of fashion, which, a lot of people have been saying is a massive polluter and, it's a big issue. So let me start by asking you this. Okay, I'll explain it like this. So going back to, started with the pandemic. The pandemic took us kind of 2 steps back in terms of the single-use plastic, in terms of the masks. But on the other hand, a lot of brands stopped producing. A lot of people kind of realized how it's maybe not that important to have that many clothing. A lot of brands decided not to do 4 shows a year, which might be for obviously a different reason, but it does help with the issue. So how long do you think that will last? Will people kind of go back to the way things been, or will the pandemic have a massive impact in terms of the sustainability in the fashion industry?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot that's been said on this topic, and just so many takes on it, right? From kind of like late March up until now. And I think you have to be optimistic when you work in environmental and social justice, when you're working in fashion. But at the same time, I think that too many people are kind of playing on this narrative that the pandemic has changed everyone. And it did change our behavior for a while. And I guess to your point, the ultimate question now is, has it changed us permanently? And my thoughts on that is no. And I would love to say yes. And I think it's really easy to have conversations where we all agree with each other and say, this has been really good for fashion sustainability. And it has made us aware that maybe we don't want so many things. But speaking from my own personal experience, I've found myself wanting things more than ever during Corona. And I don't mind, saying that or admitting it. I mean, I sat on my phone on Instagram for hours on end and I wanted stuff. And now that the lockdown is lifting, I find myself excited to go out and explore newness, whatever that is. And for me, that's a lot of experiences outside. It's a lot of rifling through the secondhand shop, but I still like things, even if I do work in fashion sustainability. So I think that we should sort of get real about this conversation and say that sustainability, it has become less of an imperative to businesses that are just trying to survive. And you can say that in the long term, sustainability is a business imperative and will help brands survive in the long term. But a response crisis isn't a long-term activity. It's a short-term activity. And we know that a lot of businesses have a lot less budget than they did before, that whether that's for advertising, for operations, or for CSR, or environmental impact, and social impact too. So this conversation is so important to have and so fascinating, but doesn't really have an answer yet. And I think that we'll start to see the industry kind of start to grow again, maybe Q4 of 2021. That's my feeling at the moment. But until then, I think it is a scramble to exist for some of these brands. And I'm not saying that they all should exist. Maybe some of them shouldn't. But hopefully this global pandemic will have helped businesses look at the long-term viability of what they do. Yeah. And that would be a good thing.
Yeah, that is interesting, because I have read that a lot of brands are kind of setting their goals now, how to use maybe this situation to kind of learn from our mistakes, kind of how to implement more sustainable ideas. But a lot of those brands are setting goals for like 2030, 2050. And I see that in a lot of different, cases. And it's great that those brands have those goals, but is it really realistic? Isn't it like in 30 years, people will forget that those brands set those goals? So now they kind of have this peace of mind that they put it out there, made the consumers happy, and, they'll leave it for later.
I think that using a commitment as an action is one of the key, is at the heart of how we understand greenwashing.
Yeah.
So I don't condemn brands making commitments, not at all. But maybe the language that brands use around making that commitment shouldn't be framing it as an action. At the same time, we want to know that brands are making commitments to change. And depending on the brand and how agile or its size, we know that it can take a really long time.
And a lot of money, to be honest.
A lot of money and resource,
yeah.
A lot of investment towards metrics that maybe aren't around margins as well. So non-financial metrics are starting to emerge as one of the only ways that brands can kind of track their performance. And that's very, on a personal level, I love to see it, because if we can start, if the fashion industry can start defining success away from profit margin growth rhetoric and towards positive impact rhetoric, which sounds really idealistic, but is the way we have to operate in a climate crisis and a social crisis, then I love to see that. Yeah. Having said that, it kind of the paradox of communicating sustainability is one of the industry's biggest problems, because we are so much more discerning as students, as citizens, as consumers, as young people and older people. I think we're all getting much more literate, and our expectations are getting higher. But still our actions don't necessarily match our ambition around clothing, right?
I think it's interesting from a PR perspective, being a PR communication student, how there's this paradox of obviously PR at the end of the day is kind of being about, driving consumption in any way, because obviously you're trying to push some products. And how do you think, future of PR could change when people see through this, and can brands be authentic in trying to become sustainable?
I love this. I love the kind of setup of this conversation, because so rarely in my work in sustainability do I connect with professionals that work in PR. And that's something I'm trying to change, which is, probably why you guys reached out to me, and I'm so happy you did. If a brand is influential, if it has a community, then it's done well. And it's probably done well because it has been able to communicate its values, or create a product that people need or just really desire. If the creation of those products are problematic, then that's a major issue. But fashion is an extractive industry, just like energy. I mean, we're working towards solutions in production that are regenerative, but essentially we take when we make things, and fashion hasn't yet worked out how to give back or to keep things moving in a circle. But if you can work with a brand in a PR point of view to have a better dialogue with its community that is actually based on education, then what's wrong with that? Isn't that an amazing opportunity? If a brand is, a voice that thousands of people in a certain demographic listen to, then how do we use that voice better? And there are a lot of ways to do that, as long as the information is based in fact and science. And there's lots of great research. So I actually believe that communications and PR are the key to sustainability in so many ways. And I'm just really excited to see more students and young people engaging with and responding really well to just learning stuff about the environment.
Yeah, I think it's important to see how even from my perspective, 3 years ago when I applied for this course, sustainability and CSR activities weren't a thing. I mean, they obviously were a thing, but they weren't spoken about. It wasn't something that, when I applied for this course, something that I would ever read about. So I think it's interesting to see how it's changing and how the consumers are kind of making brands think about this and making brands take action and, just have a stance on this issue. And I think that the most kind of what I feel like is a bit problematic for me is that obviously fashion, as you said, it is about producing, and producing in itself is just not sustainable. And yes, of course, we're trying to find ways to kind of, extract those resources in a different way and become more renewable. So I think that's great, but it is still an issue of we're trying to promote sustainability, but we're still selling, clothes, which
to some extent undermines the whole positive change ambition, right? And I think that this feeling, which can be linked to this idea of cognitive dissonance, whereby your heart or your beliefs don't necessarily match your actions or the things you do. There's a huge opportunity to align those two kind of worlds. And yes, creating things is problematic, but like I said at the beginning, let's be real about this. Clothes aren't going anywhere. And it's not just clothes that aren't going anywhere, but I believe it's part of human nature to self-elevate, to self-improve. And we do that through our identities. And the way we show our identities is through our appearance in a lot of ways. There's lots of ways to communicate who you are without the way you look, of course. But let's be honest, like that's how we do it. So I feel like we're also in a kind of cancel culture right now, which lacks accountability. And so many of us are feeling the same way, but we just don't really know how to articulate it. And to me, that's like a kind of invisible force that we as young leaders just need to get behind and drive. And if we do that through the mechanism of a fashion brand, then it's better than doing nothing, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good point. So we kind of know now that, consumers drive the directions that brands are going. People care about sustainability. Brands will do, as much as possible to portray that. So we all have an important role here. The consumer voicing their needs, but also the brand choosing not to do those force shows per year. Trying to find those more eco-friendly materials. And PR is obviously having a conversation about changing the strategy. So do you think that is enough to kind of change the industry, or maybe should fashion be maybe regulated by a third party, such as even the government, in the same way that the government regulates emissions from cars by introducing congestion charges? Do you think fashion should be regulated in that way? And I know that there are already some plans in motion with, the Fashion Pact underneath G7. So I can see that it all kind of is going in that direction. But do you think that is a good idea?
Well, first of all, yeah, to kind of break it down a bit, I always in my mind, find it very helpful to distinguish between fashion and clothing. And you can define them however you like, but the way I do it is kind of like at a price point level. So a high street, low cost brand provides clothing, and a label that might show a fashion week and has a limited distribution might be fashion. You don't have to agree with that. It just really helps me. So you can't regulate creativity in fashion.
Yeah, exactly. It's a form of art, so that's the question.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why people want to be part of the industry, and we all do. We love it, but it's so problematic, and that's when you can sort of think about clothing and think about volume and responsibility around what you make and what happens to it at the end of use. So I absolutely believe that the clothing industry needs to be regulated, and I'm also sure that it will be. If you look at other cities, is at a different kind of stage of development in different locations in the global north and in the global south, of course. But if we're talking about cities in the global north, like London or New York or Copenhagen, where I'm based, cities need infrastructure as well as policy to manage waste, which textiles and used clothes is waste. So without a legislative drive towards infrastructure in a city, and what I mean by that is, collection for clothes at a state level, then I really don't see how much change can happen, because we know that brands take back things. You can send your old sneakers back to this brand and they'll recycle them, or you might be able to take old clothes back to a high street store and get a discount on the next lot of clothes you buy, which are really good initiatives. But they're not widespread enough to make change on the planet according to its boundaries. So I do think that the fashion and clothing industry should be regulated, and I've been privileged to be part of or work alongside policy teams that are doing that at an EU level, which has been really interesting. But there's no reason why that story shouldn't be told better as well, and maybe fashion PR has a role to play there as well.
Thank you so much. I don't want to take more of your time, and we are a bit limited. Thank you so much. That was really insightful, and I hope it's going to help a lot of both students and professionals kind of understand that topic better. And hopefully we can all kind of make a change.
Yeah, I think we all want to, so let's just work together and do it.